Settle yourself. Let the day fall away. And let us drift back, slowly, to a world not so far removed in time, but distant enough to feel like another planet. The world of 19th century Britain. It was an age of invention, of steam, of iron and ambition. But it was also an age of soot, of shadows cast by smokestacks and of millions who lived hard, unrelenting lives. You may picture cobbled streets lit by dim gas lamps, their flames flickering through the London fog. The rattle of carriage wheels echoes in the distance, while somewhere, deeper in the city, the steady hiss of a steam engine breathes like a great iron beast. Tonight you will wander through this world. You will step inside the slums where families crowded together, explore the childhood of Charles Dickens, stand quietly in the fog of Whitechapel as rumors of Jack the Ripper spread, and finally drift among the polished floors and chandeliers of the Victorian elite. It is a journey through contrasts, through grime and splendor, misery and invention, darkness and dazzling light, and through it all, the tone will be gentle, like a guide leading you softly down narrow lanes, past factory gates, and into drawing rooms where whispered voices rise and fall. Let us begin, not with the aristocrats, not with the inventors, but with those who carried the heaviest burden, the poor of Britain's growing industrial cities. Imagine yourself in London in the 1840s. The population has exploded. People from the countryside pour into the city, hoping for work in the new factories, hoping for wages to support their families. But the city is not prepared for them. The streets are narrow, twisting and damp. The houses lean together, their walls darkened with soot. Windows are few, and the light that does slip inside is pale, filtered through a haze of coal smoke. Inside these houses, if they can be called houses, families live crammed together in single rooms. 10, 12, even more, sleeping on straw pallets, sharing space with rats and insects. Privacy is a luxury no one can afford. The air is thick, not just with smoke, but with the smell of refuse. Sewage flows through open ditches, or worse, stagnates in cellars below. There are few toilets. Many share a single outdoor privy, its wood splintering with overuse. Children carry pails to empty chamber pots into the gutter outside. The stench clings to the walls, to the clothes, to the very breath of the people who live here. Imagine yourself walking down such a lane. The ground is uneven, muddy in winter, dusty in summer. You pass a doorway and glimpse the hollow eyes of a child, thin, with bare feet, watching you in silence. And then there is the factory. At dawn, the slum stirs. Men and women hurry to the mills, to the foundries, to the textile workshops. Children, too, walk alongside them, their faces still pale with sleep. Inside the factories, the air is hotter, drier, filled with lint, dust, or smoke. The machines roar constantly, their gears grinding without pause. The rhythm is relentless. Workers labor 12, 14, sometimes 16 hours a day. There are few breaks. Meals are often nothing more than bread and weak tea, eaten quickly before returning to the clamor of machines. For the youngest, the children who dart between spinning frames to clear loose threads, or crawl under machines to sweep out dust, the work is especially harsh. Many fall ill. Some simply vanish from the record of life, their absence barely noticed in the tide of the city. In these slums, illness spreads like fire: cholera, typhus, tuberculosis. Names whispered with dread as families watch one member after another succumb. A single contaminated water pump can spark an outbreak that sweeps through entire districts. Doctors of the time, still uncertain of germs and microbes, offer little more than rest, herbs, or bleeding. Many do not recover. Children die young. Mothers bury infants before they can walk. Fathers collapse from exhaustion long before old age. The rhythm of life in the slums is not just one of work, but of survival against odds that rarely favor the poor. And yet, despite the grime, the stench, the hunger, life goes on. People laugh, even in these alleys. Neighbors share scraps of bread or stories in the dim light of a candle. Mothers sing to their babies, soft lullabies that drift through thin walls. For even in the darkest corners of Victorian Britain, humanity persists. Fragile, weary, but unbroken. As we leave the slums behind, our attention turns to a man who knew them well. A boy who grew up among debt, shame, and labor, and who would later transform his memories into stories that shaped how the world remembers Victorian misery. His name was Charles Dickens. If you are still with me, comfortably resting, perhaps eyes already heavy, we will now leave the narrow slum streets for the quieter, more personal journey of one man. His name, of course, is Charles Dickens. Today, you may know him as one of the greatest English writers, the creator of stories that have shaped how we imagine Victorian London itself. But behind his words and his characters, there was a life marked by hardship, resilience, and a restless energy that never quite allowed him peace. Imagine Dickens as a boy, only 12 years old, living not in comfort, but in uncertainty. His father, John Dickens, had been sent to debtor's prison, unable to repay what he owed. For young Charles, this meant something few children of his later fame ever endured. He was sent to work in a blacking factory, pasting labels onto bottles of shoe polish. Day after day, in a dark, rat-infested warehouse by the Thames, he labored silently, feeling abandoned and forgotten. This experience, though he rarely spoke of it openly, carved deep impressions in his mind. It is why, years later, his novels gave voice to neglected children, to orphans, to the overlooked poor who had no champion but words. As Dickens grew older, he found his way into journalism. With quick wit and endless curiosity, he began reporting on Parliament, on trials, on the humdrum flow of London life. His gift was not only in observing, but in transforming what he saw into something vivid. When his sketches and serialized stories began to reach the public, they struck a chord. People recognized themselves, their neighbors, and the rhythms of the city around them. His first major success, the Pickwick Papers, made him famous almost overnight, and from there, his pen never seemed to rest. Yet, behind the popularity, Dickens was driven by more than entertainment. His novels became windows into the struggles of industrial society. In Oliver Twist, the orphan's hunger, the workhouse's cruelty, and the criminal underworld all echoed the realities Dickens had brushed against in his youth. In Hard Times, he laid bare the relentless grind of factory life, reducing human beings to cogs in a system that demanded productivity over dignity. In Bleak House, he skewered the endless delays of the legal system, where cases dragged on while lives crumbled. Dickens himself was not a calm man. He had an energy that seemed both brilliant and restless. He loved walking, sometimes 20 miles at a stretch through the streets of London, observing every detail, letting the city feed his imagination. He also performed public readings of his works, dramatizing them for audiences who listened with rapt attention. These readings, though wildly popular, exhausted him physically and emotionally. Still, he could not stop. It was as though he was compelled to share, to keep bringing the city's voices into light. His personal life, however, was far from idyllic. Though he married Catherine Hogarth and had 10 children with her, the marriage grew strained. Dickens could be demanding, sharp-tongued, and impatient. Eventually, the marriage ended in separation, something scandalous in Victorian society. Even so, Dickens carried on writing, editing, and engaging with social reform efforts. He was deeply involved in charities for poor children and institutions meant to rehabilitate women from lives of hardship. In time, Dickens became more than just a novelist. He became a kind of mirror for the Victorian world itself. His readers, whether wealthy or working class, found in his books both entertainment and uncomfortable truths. They could no longer ignore the grime of the slums, the child labor, the stark inequalities. Dickens wrapped these truths in story, making them unavoidable yet palatable. And when he died in 1870, he was mourned not just as a writer, but as a voice of an age. Buried in Westminster Abbey, his resting place was among kings and statesmen, though he himself had risen from the shadows of a factory. As you think of him now, perhaps you picture a man at his desk, candlelight flickering, pen scratching across the page. Outside, the London fog swirls, the carriages rattle by, but inside his study there is only the steady flow of words. Dickens was more than a writer. He was a witness, a translator of misery into story. And without him, our image of Victorian life might be far dimmer, less textured, less real. Now that Dickens has shown us the written face of Victorian London, let us turn to something darker, more elusive, an unsolved puzzle that still lingers in the imagination today. The year is 1888, and the setting is Whitechapel, one of London's poorest districts. Narrow alleys, dim gas lamps, the smell of coal smoke and refuse, all of it forms a backdrop to a story that terrified the city. You are walking there at night, perhaps, your footsteps echoing against damp cobblestones. The streets are crowded by day, but at night they empty, leaving shadows and silence. It was here that a series of murders took place, crimes so brutal that even hardened policemen were shaken. The name that history gave to the faceless killer was Jack the Ripper. Between August and November of 1888, at least 5 women, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, were killed. Each of them lived on the margins of society, often turning to sex work to survive in a harsh city. Their lives were fragile, their deaths horrifying. And what made the murders so notorious was not only their violence, but the mystery surrounding them. The killer was never caught. The police of the time, the Metropolitan Police, tried desperately to solve the crimes. They interviewed suspects, patrolled the streets, and gathered testimony. Yet their efforts were hampered by a lack of modern forensic methods. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, only faint traces, eyewitness accounts that conflicted, vague descriptions and letters sent to newspapers, some signed Jack the Ripper. Whether those letters were genuine or hoaxes is still debated. The press, eager for sensation, published every rumor. The crimes became not just local news, but international headlines, and the name Jack the Ripper stuck, becoming larger than the crimes themselves. The killer, whoever he was, became an icon of terror, a shadow cast across the whole city. Over time, many suspects have been suggested. Some say it was a local butcher or doctor, someone with anatomical knowledge. Others whisper about artists, aristocrats, even members of the royal household. None of these theories has ever been proven. Each time, evidence appears to point in one direction. Doubt quickly follows. The Ripper is like smoke. You reach for it, and it slips away. What makes the story endure, however, is not only the mystery of the killer's identity, but what it reveals about Victorian society. The women who died were not wealthy nor powerful. They were part of London's invisible poor, living in lodging houses, sleeping rough when they could not pay. Their lives tell us as much about the era as their deaths. The crimes also shone a harsh light on the limits of Victorian policing and the fears of a rapidly growing city. London in the late 19th century was modernizing quickly, yet beneath its polished surface were districts like Whitechapel, overcrowded, desperate, and dangerous. The Ripper's story is in many ways a story about that hidden London, and so, the mystery remains. Over a century later, countless books, films, and theories continue to speculate, but Jack the Ripper's true identity has never been confirmed. Perhaps it never will be. In that uncertainty, the story continues to haunt, not as a puzzle waiting for a solution, but as a reminder of the city's shadows and of the people who once walked its dark streets. While the alleys of Whitechapel were narrow, muddy, and filled with hardship, not far away another London and another England existed. A world of marble staircases, glittering chandeliers, and hushed drawing rooms where the pace of life could not have been more different. To step into the great houses of the Victorian aristocracy is to enter a kind of parallel universe. Imagine yourself approaching a country estate, perhaps in the rolling green countryside of Surrey or Yorkshire. The gravel crunches beneath carriage wheels, and the great house rises ahead. Rows of tall windows, ivy climbing its stone, and vast lawns stretching toward a distant horizon. Inside, warmth glows from oil lamps, the air faintly scented with beeswax polish and the perfumes of the ladies who pass through the hall. The rhythms of aristocratic life were measured not by the factory bell, but by the seasons and the social calendar. Autumn brought hunting parties and long days on horseback. Winter filled the drawing rooms with firelight, card games, and endless dinners. Spring meant returning to London, where the season unfolded. A series of balls, operas, and grand gatherings. And summer, of course, was for the countryside once more, where gardens bloomed and orchestras played on open lawns. Within these houses, time seemed to move differently. Breakfast might not be taken until late morning. Servants brought trays of tea, polished boots, and laid-out clothes. Afternoons were devoted to leisure, perhaps a stroll through gardens designed to impress, or the quiet pleasure of reading in a sunlit library with shelves of leather-bound volumes. The evenings brought formality. Glittering balls with strings of pearls and polished shoes, the air heavy with candlelight and music, partners waltzing across polished floors. For the aristocrats, life was not only comfortable but layered with rituals of etiquette. A glance, a gesture, even the order in which one was seated at dinner, all carried meaning. Letters were written on embossed paper, and carriages lined the streets outside opera houses. In this world, appearances mattered deeply, and refinement was a currency as important as money itself. And yet, the grandeur had its costs. These houses required armies of servants to function. Footmen, maids, butlers, cooks, gardeners, stable hands. Their work was invisible to guests, but constant, from polishing silver until it gleamed to keeping fires burning in countless hearths. For every dazzling ballroom, there was a bustling kitchen, its heat and clatter hidden below stairs. The aristocracy, for all its glitter, lived in sharp contrast to the poverty of London's slums. While families in Whitechapel squeezed into single rooms, children coughing in the damp, here a single family might occupy dozens of rooms. Some opened only for special occasions. The contrast is striking. Two worlds existing side by side, separated not by oceans, but sometimes by a few short miles. Yet these great estates were more than simply symbols of excess. They were centers of political influence, of patronage for the arts, of continuity with England's long traditions. The aristocrats saw themselves as custodians of history, of land, and of society itself. Their lives, so different from the common worker, shaped the identity of the nation just as surely as the factories and slums did. And so, as we step out of the candlelit hall and into the quiet of the night, we carry with us the duality of Victorian Britain, a world of shadows and splendor, hardship and luxury, endlessly fascinating in its contrasts. And so, our journey through Victorian Britain draws to a close. We have walked slowly and quietly through the damp streets of the slums, where life was a daily struggle against overcrowding, disease, and the unyielding demands of factory work. We have paused to linger over the life of Charles Dickens, whose own hardships became the fuel for stories that would echo across centuries, giving voice to those who had none. We drifted into the dark and narrow alleys of Whitechapel, where mystery still lingers like fog, the story of Jack the Ripper reminding us of the uncertainties and fears that shadowed the city. And finally, we stepped into the glittering halls of aristocracy, where music, light, and endless wealth painted a picture of beauty, one that stood in stark contrast to the struggles outside. The Victorian world was one of opposites: poverty and wealth, darkness and light, harsh toil and refined leisure. It was a world where invention and industry reshaped life in ways both wondrous and devastating. And in remembering it, we glimpse how much of our modern life, the cities we live in, the comforts we enjoy, even the stories we tell, still carry the imprint of that age. As you lie here now, listening, you might allow yourself to feel the distance between then and now. The coal smoke has cleared. The slums are gone. The aristocratic estates, though some remain, are no longer the centers of power they once were. What endures are the lessons. That hardship leaves marks on memory, that stories shape compassion, and that even the darkest alleys of history can be walked through, safely, from the warmth of the present. So let the images fade now. The clatter of factory looms grows faint. The gas lamps of London flicker and dim. The carriages roll softly away into silence. All that remains is the gentle rhythm of your own breath. Steady, quiet, unhurried. And with that rhythm, perhaps, sleep will come, as calm and inevitable as the passing of history itself. Good night.